Alright guys, so today I'm going to make a quick video showing you different ways in which you can reduce the geometry of a complex model, either if you're using pixelmodeller AI to generate the model, or even if you've sculpted it, got the model from somewhere online, whatever. This will work for any sort of workflow. So I'm going to use pixelmodeller AI just to build a model. We'll go with this one. This one looks quite complicated, so right click it and I'll choose copy image. I'll go to Blender, make sure I've got the pixelmodeller AI add-on specifying that it's going to get the data from the clipboard and it's going to use the artificial intelligence. And the best model I find is depth anything v2. So we use that one. I'll click generate. And you can see it's generated as the depth map and both of the color map as well. And it's also applied them to the model. So if we just look at the material preview, you can see that the materials have been assigned to the model. Now we just need to modify it, so let's minimize the top bit, and now we can look at the controls we've got. It set the quality quite low because it's a very, very high resolution image. I think it's something like 16K. So it's set the quality very low so that we can use the sliders nice and quickly. So let's just scale this down to a more reasonable height, maybe something like that. Okay, and what we'll need to do to get a bit more quality in the things like, these little bumps on here, you just turn that quality up a bit. So maybe go to 10. And you can see now we're getting a bit more of that detail popping out. The higher we take it, the more detail we're going to get. But obviously it's going to be quite slow because it's such a huge image. All right, so I'll just turn that back down. Put it down to something like 10. Okay, and I think the only bit I want is the actual sword in the hand. So I'll just go into the cleanup section and I'll just remove the background until it gets rid of the bits that I don't want. So maybe somewhere about there. I'll probably bring that scale in a little bit more actually, somewhere like this. All right, and I might actually make this a mirrored object. So let's go into the shape of it and I'll just make it a -1. So basically we've got the same, it's symmetrical, it's the same on the front and the back. And then to fix all the problems we've got, like the stretching on the side there, and the being quite jagged on the edges, we'll just go down into the smoothing options, uncheck disable all smoothing. That'll fix that straight away. And then to get this sort of texture stretching around the sides a bit, I'm going to go into the side smoothing section. And before I do it, I'm actually going to turn up the quality a little bit, more sort of representative of what I want in the final object, something like that. And then we're going to go round into the side smooth, and I'll just turn this up to something like 1000. And you can see that's going to bring that front texture around to the side, and I'll just extend it a little bit with the fall off so that it goes further around. Let's make this 250 perhaps, maybe 500. And then we'll make this a bit bigger, 2000, just to bring it in a little bit more. And then I'll just use the slide on the shape to bring that a little bit closer together in the middle. So just slide that in a little bit. Something like this. Make it more sword-like. And then finally, I'm going to turn on the 3D bump. So let's just come out of smoothing, down to the bump settings, and we'll change it to 3D bump. And what this is going to do, on the sides here at the moment, we've not got any bump. So 3D bump's going to put it all around the actual object. And I'll turn this up a little bit as well, 0.1 perhaps. In fact, 0.01 rather. You see we've got the actual bump going further around the sides of the object. Right, so that's looking pretty good. It's obviously very high resolution at the moment. If we look in, it's very, it could go a lot higher. Maybe we'll change this to 30 actually to get a bit more detail. There we go. So you can see it's very high resolution. And what I want to do is change this without losing all this really fine detail. I want to get it more sort of a game-ready asset with better topology rather than just being loads of really tiny quads. Now, one thing I do want to do as well before I do that is just make sure I don't have any overlapping areas of geometry, because the 3D bump here, that it can generate overlapping areas of geometry, because it all depends on the normal of the object. We can probably find some if we look close. You can see just here where this is pointing this way, this bump's coming out this way, so they're overlapping. So we need to fix that. I'll just go into the remesh, And I'd recommend you do it in here. The reason is, this one is going to maintain the data of the object much better than the one in sculpt mode. So any color or UV data will be much better preserved with the remesh in here. So I'd recommend you use this one. So I'll enable that. And it takes a second, but you can see everything's remained identical. And we'll probably turn up the smoothing a little bit, maybe 10. And then we've got this nice looking model, which we can maybe drop into a game or something like that. Okay, so let's get this converted into a standard mesh so that we can start reducing the amount of geometry. So right click, I'm going to choose convert to mesh. In fact, just before I do that, I might just turn the smoothing up a little bit higher in the remesh, just so that it's a little bit easier for the shrink wrap modifier that we're going to be using later to shrink onto it. And we'll choose convert to a mesh. And by the way, depending on what you've got selected here, previous 3D print, is going to control which material is in use by the object. So if you don't have this ticked, it's going to be using a material with the image texture. If it is ticked, it's going to be using a material with vertex colors. Now, if you're going to be remeshing it, you want to make sure this is not ticked. Otherwise, you're not going to have sufficient vertices to support the vertex color. You want to be using the UVs instead. So just make sure that is unticked. So right click, convert to mesh. And you can see it's converted to a mesh. We've got two materials, but only the bottom one is in use. This one is brought in, but it's not populated with text, which indicates it's not in use. That is the 3D vertex color material. So just delete that one. And now we're using this one. So if I want to modify the material, I can now do that by going into the shader editor. Right. So at the moment, we've got 2.5 million faces. What I want to do is reduce that down to something like maybe 100,000 faces maximum. So I get faster performance in rendering, in the viewport, but also so I can use it in game engines. So firstly, we need to reduce it. There's a few ways we can do it. The first way is in the generate menu in the modifiers to use decimate. Now, with the high resolution mesh, the decimate modifier, I've found it does a good job if it works, but it often takes ages, and I mean ages. We're talking 20-30 minutes sometimes, and often it will crash. So I prefer not to use this method. What I'll do instead is use the remesh option down here. So let's put this on. And actually, before I do that, let's just get rid of that. We'll make a duplicate. We're going to need this original. So Shift D, we'll duplicate it. I'll just hide the original now. So this is going to be remesh modifier. So add that remesh modifier. And we've got a few options in here. We can use the voxel remesh, smooth the blocks. Now you're going to lose the data like the color and things, but it doesn't matter because we're going to transfer that back later. So I'll just go with smooth, and I'm going to go with, maybe we'll just go straight for 8. We'll see what sort of a job that does. So we've got all the data we need. We've got a much lower resolution, 84,000 vertices. So there's option 1. I'm going to show you all 3 options for reducing the mesh, because after we've done that, the same technique of bringing back the color attributes, the UV attributes, and also the fine geometry detail is going to be the same for all 3. So we'll just duplicate this one. Shift D. Okay, and we'll hide the remesh one. We'll get rid of this remesh modifier in here. We're back to the original, and this one's going to be the Blender quad remesher. Into the data panel, we've got something in here called the remesh section, and then we've got a voxel remesh like we had before, or a quad remesh. Now, a quad remesh is going to try and build, decent edge flow, decent topology on the object, which might be important for shading, or if you're going to bend the object in whatever you're using it for, etc. Now, this is very, very unreliable. If I try and use this now, let's click on quadriflow remesh. We don't want symmetry on our 50,000 faces, should be enough. I'll choose remesh, it's not going to work. We're going to get a message saying at the bottom, the mesh needs to be manifold and have face normals that point in a consistent direction. Now, this does, I can guarantee that this has got no problem with manifold geometry. We can even test it if we go into 3D print add-on, which comes with Blender, and we'll just say, is it a solid manifold object? So check that, and it's going to say there's no non-manifold issues on there basically. It's saying the normals might be pointing the wrong way. If we go in over here, turn on face orientation, we go to solid view, so it's easier to see. You see there's no red areas. All the red areas are inside the mesh. So that's wrong as well. Now, the issue is, the reason that this doesn't work sometimes is nothing to do with the geometry, as it says. It's actually too many vertices. So all we need to do to fix it is firstly reduce the vertices before we do the quad remesh, which is fine. We can do that. So we'll quickly use a voxel remesh and just set it something like 0.001, something like that. As long as we end up with a smaller vertex count. So we'll turn on fixed poles, voxel remesh. And we're down to 1.5. So it might work now. Let's give it a try. Quad remesh, quad reflow remesh, 50,000 remesh. Now it's working. So it's nothing to do with the geometry. It's just too many vertices. Even if I was to use the voxel remesher with a value that resulted in the same number of vertices as before, the quad reflow remesh wouldn't work. So it's all about the amount of vertices. And there we go. So that's remeshed it. It was very, very slow. And we'll look at the topology. The topology is not too bad actually in this scenario. Normally it does a much worse job than that, but that is not bad. You can see the quads are following the direction of the fingers and things like that. So not too bad. But we have got a little bit of a problem here. You can see we've got an issue with the geometry. We can fix that quite easily. We're just going to sculpt mode, and we'll bring up the T menu, choose the mesh filter, and we'll just change that mesh filter mode to smooth, and we'll just smooth it out a bit, and that's going to fix any little problems like that. All right, so there's the second method. The third method, which I think is by far superior, so let's just hide this one now, get the original again. I'm going to duplicate it, Shift D. Now hide that one. So this one's going to be exoside remesh. So the exoside remesher is an add-on, which is not free, unfortunately, but it's very cheap. It's £3 per month, but you only have to rent it for 3 months. So £12 in total for 3 months. And to be honest with you, it's amazing. You don't have to mess about at all. There's no sort of messing about doing a remesh first or smoothing and things like that. So we've got to come in here, working with the original 2.5 million faces, change this to 50,000. I'm not bothered about symmetry, and I don't want to detect hard edges because it's not it's not really a hard surface model. It's quite organic. So we'll go into remesh, and this will be much faster, and the topology is usually much better as well. So the quad remesher that Blender provides took around about 4 minutes, whereas this one is probably going to take around about 20 seconds. You can see it's 60% through already. So, it's much faster. Let's just look at the quality when it's finished. And there we go. Now the topology is much better, even on things like the thumb here, the fingers, everything is much better quality topology. So if you can afford to spend £3 a month for 3 months, what's that? A burger? What's that? Three beef, not even, that's cheaper than 3 beef burgers in 3 months. Then, I'd recommend it. So the next step is to move on to actually transfer the vertex colors, the UV data, and the fine geometry data as well back into this object. So I'm going to use this one. This is going to give me the best results most likely. But the same method we're going to use, you can use for all 3 of the methods I've showed you. So what we need to do is add a multi-resolution modifier, which is in the generate menu. And we need to subdivide it a couple of times. Let's turn off optimal display, so we can get a look at the geometry. What we're wanting to do is get enough geometry so that it can sort of shrink wrap to all those fine details on the original mesh. So I'm just click subdivide. And again. And maybe one more. So subdivide one more time. You got really fine detail there now. And then we'll minimize this. And we're going to add another modifier. And this is going to be under deform. Going to be the shrink wrap modifier. Right, and let's go into solid view. We need to choose the object, which is going to be the original. And then as soon as I do that, you see we get all that detail pop back. Now you might get better results with a different one, so maybe project. If you do use project, you're going to need to turn on negative so that it can project in both directions. And you might get a few little issues like this, which most likely indicates that the resolution of the multi-resolution modifier is either too high or too low. So I'll just try dropping this down to 2, and you can see that's resolved it straight away. And then we'll delete the higher one, and we don't need that anymore. And now we should be getting, if we go into solid view, much better result. If you do get any small areas like we've got here, it's not an issue. We can fix that in a second. So we'll minimize the multi-res, and I want to apply this one now so that this actually gets baked into the multi-res modifier. So over this one, we'll choose apply. And now that's built in to the multi-res modifier. And to fix this little issue here, I'm going to go into sculpt mode. And I'm just going to choose the smooth brush. And we'll just go into this area and just smooth that out. Just have a quick check if there's any more areas. Next up, we need to transfer the geometry detail, that fine detail, into a normal map. So that when we've got this turned off and it's completely flat, the render engine, either Eevee or Cycles or your game engine, can recreate these small areas using the normal map. So let's go into the shader editor. Make sure we're using the material in here. So this is the one that's in use. And we'll add Shift A. I'm going to go with an image texture. A new one. I'll call it statue normals. I'm going to make it quite high res, so go with 4096. We don't need alpha because it's a normal map. And we'll need it to be on blank though. And then we'll choose new image. Now in order for baking to work, this needs to be unwrapped. At the moment, if we go into the data panel, you see we've got no UV maps at all after doing the remesh. I'm going to go into edit mode, select everything, U, unwrap. I'm just going to go with Smart UV Project. If you want a free 18-hour course that will take you from knowing nothing about Blender to being a professional level, I'll cover all this in that course and it's freely available on my YouTube homepage. Look for the 18-hour course, which is, I think it's 3 playlists down. So Smart UV Project is fine in this case. I'll just unwrap it. And then I'm going to add Shift A, UV map, there we go. And we're going to choose the UV map I've created. And I want to rename this actually to normals. And make sure I choose it in here again, so normals. And then we're going to plug this in here. Out of edit mode, into object mode. So I'm going to choose this, very importantly. You must choose the material that you want to write into. I'm going to go over here and just bring up the image editor rather. And we're going to choose the normals, statue normals image. You can see at the moment it's completely black. So what we need to do is go into cycles and make sure you're using GPU so it's faster. We can turn off noise threshold. We can reduce the number of samples, something low like 16. We don't need the denoiser either. And with this still selected, we're going to go down to bake. We're going to say bake from multi-res, and we want to bake the normals. And what it's going to do, it's going to bake the geometry detail from the highest subdivision mode, so the highest level, into the lowest, which is 0. Now, for this to work, you must set these to 0. Don't have it on the highest one, and then we can go back over here, down to bake, and we'll choose bake again with this still selected. And straight away, we've got the normals baked in. We can move this down. Let's move this down here. Move these ones up. And we need to plug this into a normal map color input. And then we'll plug this into the normals on the principal BSDF. And you'll see straight away, we're going to get a bit of a weird result. And that's because we need to change the color space to non-color because we didn't use 32-bit. We need to, firstly, to change this, we need to save the image. So image, save. And now this becomes available and we can choose non-color. And that's going to fix all those problems with the weird sort of look. So we've got the normal data across now from the high geometry. What we need to do is get the color data, so the vertex colors, and also the UV information across as well. Because if you look at the moment, the color texture that's been used by the original mesh is using this UV map, color UVs. If we go into the data panel of this object, we don't have that UV map. So we need to get it from the original. So we can basically transfer it into this one. So go into the modifiers, set this back to the highest one. I think was it 3 or 2? 2. So set all back to 2. You can minimize that now. And we're going to add another modifier under edit, data transfer. And I want to transfer the vertex colors. So turn on vertex data, choose colors. I don't necessarily need these. I'm just showing you in case it's useful for another use case. But in this case, because it's going to be low resolution, there aren't going to be sufficient vertices to support all the detail in the original vertex colors. But I'm going to show that. I'm just showing you for future use. But for the UVs we are going to need, we're coming to face corner data here, and then enable UVs. And then we need to say, right, where do I want to get the data from? I want to get it from the original, which is this one. It's going to take a second. We won't see anything because we need to click on generate data layers. Those data layers are still not present in here. We've got no color attributes or UV. So back in here, I'll just click on generate data layers. And then you can see we've got that color data. The UVs basically have been brought in. That's in use by this. We can check that. Go in here. You see we've now got the color UV map, and we've also got the vertex color map as well. So if I go into solid view and then change this to attribute and then click on the color attribute down here, you can see we can actually view the vertex color data because we've still got at this time, high resolution enough to be able to support that, the details in that color map. So let's go back into material preview. We'll go back into the modifier and we can now apply this. Now don't just delete it. If you delete it, you'll end up with the empty data layers. So make sure you apply it. Click on this one, apply. And then we can finally delete this. So if we look going in wireframe, we'll delete this. And now we're back to a very smooth, low resolution mesh, 59,000 vertices. But if we go into material preview, you can see we've actually got all that fine bump detail, texture detail and UVs back as well. And then we can maybe drop it into a scene. So let's go into cycles mode. And let's choose a more suitable HDRI. Let's go into the world environment mode. Let's look what we got in here. Maybe this one. I think this one's got a few statues in it and things. There we go. So we've got a few statues in there. Let's go in camera view. And we'll just position it until it get a nice angle. And let's go into the camera settings. We'll make that a bit bigger. So we'll turn down the focal length so we can see a bit more of that image. And then we can add another object. So Shift A, let's add a floor. And we'll go into the object properties for this plane and we'll make it into, and under visibility, we'll make it into a shadow catcher. So we can't see it. We'll go into the material, the object mode of the shader editor. We'll give that plane a new material. And I'm just going to hover over the color, press E to bring up the eyedropper, and then choose the floor in the HDRI as the color so that it looks like the bounce lighting is the right color when it hits the object after it's hit the floor. Okay, and then we can choose this object and we can mess about with the various different options we've got. We can maybe make it metallic, mess about with the roughness, turn off random walk, and mess about with the roughness a bit. Maybe we could give it a bit of a coat, so it's a bit glossy. There we go, so we've got a nice little statue and it's also low resolution, so it's going to perform well in when you render time or in your game engine or whatever. So hopefully that's useful, and thanks for watching. I will catch you in the next one.